this morning. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to those of you who are joining us online. I'm Reverend Mary Shelton. Those of you who know me know that I'm not Reverend Carol Huntley. And now those of you who don't know me know that too. Our dear Reverend Carol is in England and Ireland for the next couple weeks. And so she sends her love and greetings to everyone. I want to start off by drawing your attention to this beautiful altar that Sandra created for us this morning. It has reflection, it has the flowing of water, so it has the sense of eternity. As we look on this planet, either to the ocean or to the sky, we have a tendency to use that as our metaphor for eternity, because we can see as far as we can see and there's still more. So the flow and the reflection bring back to us that recognition that the infinity, the eternity that we see there is also part of us. And as an added plus, the little balls in the middle in the bowl, those are gum balls, and you're welcome to take one. Not right now, but a little bit later on if you would like one. So those are there as part of our celebration this morning. Our theme for the year, well, actually, before we go there, I want to remind us all that our vision here at Golden Gate Center for Spiritual Living is awakening personal transformation. And our mission is teaching tools for positive change. We're here in the world to see and experience a world living in love, one heart and one thought at a time. So that's who we are and what we're all about here. And this year, our theme is Your Joyous Life. There it is, which is also my joyous life, our joyous life, to live a more joyous life. And we've been using the book, The Happiness Project, to kind of gear us into that direction. And so the theme for August is Eternity is Now. Eternity is now. And we've been talking about eternity throughout the month. And so the nowness of eternity, it's kind of hard to gel those two things together because we don't have a good sense of eternity yet. It seems to us like it must just be a really long time. So that's the question I'm actually asking this morning. Our goal for this month is to touch eternity, to actually get a taste of it or a glimpse of it. And so this morning, what I'm talking about is eternity. Is it just a really long time? Is that the question? Is it just a really long time? You know, when we get together in the morning before the service begins to do our morning circle, one of the things we do as the prayer starts is we all claim a quality for the day. And mine was twinkly. This was a quality for the day. And this story reminds me of a lady who was twinkly. The preacher's Sunday sermon topic was forgive your enemies. And he was one of those guys who speaks until the Spirit is finished with him. And so it had been kind of a long sermon. And toward the end of the service, he asked his congregation, okay, how many of you have forgiven your enemies today? And about half the congregation raised their hands. So he repeated the question a little more forcefully. And as it was well past lunchtime, about 80% raised their hands. And so he went on a while longer. And then finally he repeated his question one last time with great fervor, and every person raised their hand this time except one small elderly lady. And Mrs. Jones, inquired the preacher, are you still not willing to forgive your enemies? And Mrs. Jones, smiling sweetly, replied, I don't have any. Mrs. Jones, that's very unusual. How old are you? 93, she said. Mrs. Jones, what a blessing and a lesson you are to all of us. Would you please come down in front of this congregation and tell us how a person can live 93 years and not have an enemy in the world? And so Mrs. Jones, she got up and she tottered down the aisle. She came up onto the platform. She faced the congregation. The preacher gave her a microphone and she smiled and said, I outlived all the old bags. Forgiveness by attrition. This was a lady who was as close to eternity as most of us get in this lifetime, and she had outlived all of her enemies by that time. You know, as we're asking the question, is eternity just a really long time? You know, in everyday terms, according to Wikipedia, eternity is thought of either as an infinite or indeterminately long period of time. However, in classical philosophy, eternity is held to be that which exists outside of time. And you know, one of my previous talks here, I was talking about the nature of time and space being related to each other and related to form. So in the formless, would time be the same? You know, is it the same when we're not in the body as it is for us when we are, and how do we know? The theologian Augustine said, "How can the past and future be when the past no longer is and the future is not yet? As for the present, if it were always present and never moved on to become the past, it would not be time, but eternity." So from his perspective, eternity was outside of time. Now, from another perspective, Craig Ferguson, who is a comedian on late night television, in his book said, "Time is only linear for engineers and referees." And Graham Greene, the novelist, said, "Eternity is said not to be an extension of time, but an absence of time. That strange mathematical point of endlessness, a point with no width, occupying no space." So it seems as if the question of eternity, when it's looked at by scientists, by theologians, by comedians, still is that question of what is timelessness? How does that work? What does that look like? So the nearest thing we have is looking out as far as we can see into the night sky. And when we do that, we're actually looking into layers of the past, because what we're looking at is light that took a while to reach us. So we might be looking at light that's 8 minutes away from us, or we might be looking at light that traveled that's really hundreds of years old, or maybe older than that, and we're seeing it all at the same time for us here, but some of that light is older than other light that we're seeing in this moment. So in a way, we're looking into the infinity of the past when we simply look at the night sky. As far as we can see, we're seeing light, but some of it belongs to stars that have already died, that are that far away from us. So the light is still traveling, but its original source is gone. Maybe has been gone for a long time, while the light is still traveling to get to us. I see that you've already glazed over. This is too early in the talk to glaze over, all right? So it's a good metaphor, though. The night sky is a good metaphor for eternity, because it is as far as we can see, and we know that there is more beyond what we can see that goes on as far as we can imagine, further than we know so far. So we're thinking about this idea of time versus eternity, looking at those two. You know, when we live in time, we're looking at a logical, orderly, more or less, sequence of events with this arrow of time that starts in the past, travels through the present, moves into the future. So what is eternal life? You know, when we think of it as a really long time, it seems like, well, what do we do? We're not just going to sit around and play harps, are we? Because that seems really boring, even though it's touted as, you know, great bliss, you're in the presence of God. That's good, but, you know, what is there to do? So we wonder, how is eternity going to be interesting to us if it is really just a very long time? What is eternal life? Well, you know, we're here now. We don't remember where we were before, but as people of faith, we recognize that there seems to be evidence that there is something beyond physical life. We know this from people who've had near-death experiences. Even doctors and scientists who up to the time of a near-death experience did not believe there was anything after the physical death of the body. So we as people of faith, like people of faith for eons all over the planet, have a sense, have an inkling that there was life for us before we came into these physical vehicles, and there will be when we leave it. So the real question when theologians and scientists and philosophers are looking at and asking about eternity, why are they asking this question? The real question isn't about eternity itself. The real question is about what happens after we die. That's the real question. That's what we're really asking. That's why we care about eternity at all. The real question is our curiosity, what's next? What happens after death? That's the real question. And so, when we look at the mystery from the point of view of clues, the clues we get are from people who have almost died, who actually did die, but then for some reason came back. And they tell us all kinds of interesting things. I found a series of short videos from a young man named Ben Breedlove, who was born with a very serious congenital heart defect. He died 3 times before he died. He did die at 18, a few days after he made these videos. He describes in placards, which he holds up, he describes his experience as a 4-year-old who died and saw, as he was being rushed on a gurney, stretcher, down the halls of the hospital with his mother running alongside, he saw this brilliant light above him, and he said, "Mom, look at that light." And there were no lights on in the hall. She said, there's no light, honey, there's no light there. But it was so peaceful for him, he couldn't help but grin. That was the first time that he actually then died and came back. The second time happened when he was 14, and then the third time happened a few days before he actually died. And in between that time and the time he died, he made these 3 short videos where he talks about his experience. I looked at the video from his memorial where his sister is talking about how much they loved him, how much they missed him, and experience she had with him in a conversation, just the 2 of them in the middle of the night, where she had found him, she'd gone looking for him. He was not in the house, and she found him out sitting outside looking at the stars where he went to talk to God. And she was asking him if he was sorry he had come back, or if he was glad he had come back. And he said, "I guess so." And then he burst into tears. And he was telling her about how peaceful and beautiful it was, and that this was a place outside where he came to talk to God. And she said, "Well, we're all really glad you're still here, Ben." And they were a religious family. And she said, life is God's gift to us, and we living we're the gift back to God. And Ben said, "I think that's true, and I think I've had this experience so God could let me know that heaven is worth it." And a few days later, he was gone. The experience he had of this incredible peacefulness gets described by people who have near-death experiences, but it's also partly frustrating for them to describe because there are no words. The sense of peacefulness that we have here and the sense of time that we have here are not the same. And there's nothing to compare it to, so when they describe it, it's frustrating for them because it feels inadequate. Does this make sense? It's a little bit like if you've ever learned a foreign language, you begin to learn that there are gradations of experience and description. And for some words, there's no real translation from English to another language, or conversely, from that language into English. You can get a felt sense of it in that language, but you can't quite convey it exactly the same way in English. So we experience a little bit of that right here. Or if you've been to an event that had a particular effect on you and you're trying to describe it to someone who's never been there, it can be frustrating because the experience doesn't exactly fall into logical, linear language. Do you know what I'm saying? This is not a rhetorical question. Can you relate to this? Yeah, okay, good. Just checking in there. Another woman, an Irish woman who had a near-death experience, said she was immersed in pulsating, vibrating waves of blissful infinity. That was her description of it. And she said everything was pure energy, harmony, bliss, and vibrance. And then she said, we're in it all the time. We're in it all the time. And so when she recovered, she wanted to maintain that. It's kind of like Jill Bolte-Taylor, who talks about my stroke of insight, and she says, I was willing to recover up to a point. And what she didn't want to release, and what this woman also didn't release, was that sense of being in that experience of connectedness, of vibrance, of blissfulness. And they managed in their return to dwell in that. Well, we would all like to experience that. And we will. And maybe we have glimpses of it from time to time. But it's hard for us to understand it. It's like, how many of you have seen the movie Defending Your Life? Do you know that movie? There is a scene in which Albert Brooks, who is defending his life, this is in the afterlife, his attorney disappears for a few days. And when he comes back, you know, he's had a stand-in that Albert Brooks wasn't so fond of. And when his attorney comes back, he says, where were you? I needed you. You know, you were gone for 3 days. And his attorney says, well, you know, I could explain it to you, but you wouldn't understand. And Albert Brooks says, well, I'm not stupid. Try me. And he says, it's Rip Torn, who's his attorney, and he says, okay, I was trapped near the inner circle of thought. Understand? And Albert Brooks goes, no, of course not, because we can't go there to that place yet. But it was a great example of putting something into words that if you don't have the experience, doesn't really make any sense, right? Eben Alexander, how many of you are familiar with him? He wrote Proof of Heaven. Eben Alexander is a neurosurgeon who did not believe in an afterlife, although he was ostensibly Catholic, did not really believe in an afterlife until he had bacterial meningitis and was in a coma for a week with absolutely zero brain activity. So absolutely zero brain activity in medical terms means his brain could not produce imagery. It was essentially offline. And during the week that he was in a coma, which with bacterial meningitis, nobody comes back from a week in a coma. You're basically talking about living in a vegetative state. In fact, they were about to unplug him when he opened his eyes. During the time that he was away, he talked about time like this. I mean, he described it afterwards in this way. He said, time in this place was different from the simple linear time we experience on Earth, and it is as hopelessly difficult to describe as every other aspect of it. The world of time and space, now these are from separate places in the book, in which we move in this terrestrial realm, is tightly and intricately meshed within these higher worlds. He said there were many universes, many worlds. In other words, these worlds aren't totally apart from us because all worlds are a part of the same overarching divine reality. From those higher worlds, one could access any time or place in our world. In other words, the past isn't gone as we experience it or think of it to be. And then he said, at a different place in the book, bless you, to get a little, if only a very little idea of what this feels like, ponder how time lays itself out in dreams. In a dream, before and after become tricky designations. You can be in one part of the dream and know what's coming even if you haven't experienced it yet. My time out beyond was something like that, though I should also underline that what happened to me had none of the murky confusion of our earthbound dreams. Everything he experienced was crystal clear. And the other thing he experienced was that everything he needed to know, he knew immediately and in fullness and could understand it in ways that his human brain could not retain or process or understand or remember because it's too small and limited. What he could remember was that he knew. That he knew. So everything he asked, everything he wanted to know, he was able to know and understand. And it also was made clear to him that it was impossible to know and understand the intricacies of everything that exists everywhere in all the universes. It is beyond at least the level of development that he was in the moment that he was having that experience. Now that to me is a human experience of eternity, or I guess human is too limiting because he was beyond the human at that point. But when we look into the afterlife or the next step or what comes beyond this, we're going to be in a place where, it appears anyway, the limitations of the physical being, the physical mind, and this particular personality that we've taken on will be set aside. And so we'll be opened up if we're able, if we're willing, if we're available to be. Another person who was talking about a near-death experience said that every time she had a thought, she was up near the ceiling looking at her body, which was not looking good, but she wasn't concerned. She was up on the ceiling, and every time she had a thought, this little blob would appear, next to her, until the room was starting to be filled with these little blobs, and she thought, what are those? And then she realized those were her thoughts in the first stage of manifestation. And she decided that she would focus on an idea as intensely as she could to see if she could create it. And she manifested a house in detail in this experiment. So when she came back, she said, when people say you create your own reality, that's true. It's not a metaphor, it's true. And so we are, in kind of our infancy, I think, in grasping not only this idea, but in putting it into practice, in focus, in learning that this spiritual law of mind and spirit that we talk about, it's not just a nice idea. It's something that's real, and we experience it and move it forward to the degree that we learn to focus and maintain our attention and attitude, our feeling and thought, and sustain it in a particular place, and repeat it, and repeat it, and let go of and neutralize that which contradicts it. That's really our practice in the science of mind. But as those of you know who have learned it and practiced it, it's much easier to talk about than it is to do consistently, yes? So, we've been gifted to be brought into this teaching that used to be reserved for the Illuminati. It used to be reserved for those who had been initiated and trained, and we think science of mind classes and practitioner training take a long time. In the classical times, people that were trained in this way, it took lifetimes for them to learn and be initiated, and it was kept secret. Because I suppose they thought people would run amok, and I guess we kind of do, but we're already running amok whether we know that we're using the law or not. So we might as well have an idea of what we're doing and try to get a grip on it. So now, it's not uncommon for people to have a recognition that their beliefs and their thoughts are having an influence on what they're experiencing. And I think it's becoming important for us to understand as a global community that we don't just create individually. We create collectively. We create as couples. We create as families. We create as neighborhoods. We create as political parties. We create as religious organizations. We create as a global community. We're creating in consciousness constantly. We don't have a choice about that. So what I'm enthused about is that it's not just our organization as Centers for Spiritual Living that has this vision of a world that works for everyone. That's cropping up all over the place. It's cropping up in organizations and groups and grassroots organizing and in social media all over the planet. It's catching. Now, it's not advertised a lot, and we don't see it in the news and on television programs because, as Ernest Holmes says, we still have a morbid curiosity with disaster and tragedy. So the shows we tend to gravitate to, whether they're news programs or comedies or dramas, they have a lot of trauma and drama in them. For some odd reason that I have yet to be able to figure out logically, as a planet, it's okay with us for our children to see or experience, or even in imaginary format, tons of violence, but sex we find upsetting. I mean, I'm not assuming they should be watching people have sex all the time, but it just seems to me like get a grip here. You know, does this seem like this is in balance? I just don't think so. That's me. I just don't think so. So we come back then to, what are the messages of eternity? What are the messages of eternity? Whether we're in the body or not in the body, what are the messages of eternity? And so Eben Alexander, who wrote the book Proof of Heaven, as a medical neurosurgeon, when he came back and he looked at his own medical records and said, this is not possible. A human brain cannot possibly create what I experienced, the richness of what I experienced. It cannot possibly be a dying brain's chemical process. It's just not possible. This brain was not happening. Something else, some other thing was happening. Some consciousness that wasn't in the brain is what was happening to me. That's where I was. That's what I was. So the mysteries that philosophers and scientists and religious people and avatars look into, the question of who am I? Why am I here? What is the meaning of all this? Is this all there is? Those questions are asked because in us there is a curiosity and a sense that there is something more, and that we want to penetrate it, we want to experience it, we want to return to it, we want to dwell in it. We want to find it and experience it in our here and now lives. Eben Alexander said that he was given an answer to this, or he was given a response that allowed him to understand what the message of eternity was. And he said, I have to put it in the words that I can say now, although it was not conveyed to me in words. He said, here's what it was. You are loved and cherished. Now that's huge, because loved is great, but cherished is this deep, unconditional, everlasting, juicy, rich, yummy enfoldment of love. You are loved and cherished. It didn't say, as long as you follow my commandments. It didn't say, as long as you convert to fill-in-the-blank religion. It didn't say, as long as you accept anybody in particular as your avatar, your guru, your Lord and Savior, your fill-in-the-blank, right? None of that. You are loved and cherished. Second, you have nothing to fear. Now, if you're an eternal being, the most I think that we can fear is pain and fear. There's really nothing else, because death is only an expanded version of our fear of pain and fear. You know, and as Ram Dass says, you know, if you're an atheist, secular materialist, and you die, and then you look around and you say, gee, I thought I did. I mean, I thought I died. And a voice says, you did. Then what? Then what? You know, so death is easier than we think, that part. I think. It's just fear and pain that really get us, you know, fear and pain. Well, you know, we want to manage pain. I think we found some ways to kind of manage pain to some degree, and we can certainly manage it from the inside to some degree also. And fear then, fear is the one that we have to look at and say, you can't hurt me. I'm going to go ahead and feel you and know that you can't hurt me. That I can be afraid and I can still choose. I can be afraid and I can still be effective. I can be afraid and I can still move. I can be afraid and not like the feeling, but not get stuck. So, you know, do your worst. I'm not giving in just because you're here with me. And then it kind of takes the teeth out of it. You know, really. I mean, if you're just going to go, okay, here you are again, come along. You know, how bad could it be? After a while, fear is not so scary. Does that make sense? We have to befriend it, kind of, and realize it's only trying to tell us this is a big deal, right? Well, okay, it's a big deal, so let's walk into it and go for it. Let's go big instead of going home. And the third one is, there is nothing you can do wrong. Now that's kind of hard to get your head around, right? Because there are so many things that we do to each other as human beings that seem wrong. But from the infinite perspective, if we are infinite beings, if we cannot be created or destroyed, we cannot actually hurt one another. Now that is not permission to go and be nasty. Because we still have to, deal with the ramifications of stuff we do. So that's not so smart from an enlightened self-care perspective. But from a truth perspective, too, you can't really hurt yourself or anybody else. You can only delay yourself in terms of your long-term discovery of who and what you are, this wholeness, this fullness. So here are these messages of eternity. Eben Alexander said, if I were to summarize it, the message is love. The message is love. And I'm going to try to boil down a long story into a short one to conclude with today. In my book, Guidance from the Darkness, which I'm about to re-release, updated and revised with a new title, which is A Darkness Filled with Light, I tell a story of a man that I know from Southern California who was hit by a car. He was hit by a car deliberately by 4 young men who were out carousing and having a good time. And the policemen and the EMTs that came thought for sure he was going to die. He was there with his wife. She kept saying, don't leave me, don't leave me. They caught the guy who drove the car. And for a while, my friend was so angry, he was going to go out and buy a gun so he could defend himself and his family. So a friend of his who was really smart went with him and took him out to buy this gun. And he said, my friend said to me that, he goes, my friend was so wise. He made me tell the salesman that the reason I wanted to buy a gun was to shoot human beings. And I said, maybe this isn't a good idea for me. And so the day of the trial, the sentencing, not the trial, but the sentencing for this young man, he said he decided, he was still feeling ambivalent, but he decided he'd go to the sentencing. And he went up in the elevator in the courthouse. And when the elevator doors opened, there was an empty hallway except for one person, the defendant. He said, Reverend Mary, it was just me and him in an empty hall. If I'd wanted to, I could have killed him. And I walked over, he said, and I said to myself, okay, Spirit, what do you want me to do here? And he said, I went over and I sat down next to him and we started to talk. And I asked him if we had to wait, and he said, the judge and the lawyers aren't here, so we have to wait. And he said they kept us waiting for 4 hours. So we wound up going downstairs for coffee and talking, and he apologized. The defendant apologized. He said, I read in the Bible that if you lie to a man, you can restore him by telling the truth. And if you steal something from him, you can restore him by returning what you stole. But what I realized was, I almost took your life. And it says in the Bible, if you take a man's life, there's no way you can restore that. So I want you to know, I'm not a religious guy. I won't pretend that I am, but I'm really sorry for what I did. And I'm afraid I'm going to go to prison. And my friend said to him, I just want to tell you, I believe in you. I don't see that for you. I believe you're more than this. And boy, we must have really gone to a lot of trouble for each other to learn whatever we both need to learn here. He said, boy, he really wasn't expecting me to say that. And they went back upstairs to the courtroom, and they embraced before they went in. And he decided he wasn't going to stay. So when he got up to leave, the judge said to him, don't you want to stay here? Don't you want to say something about, what kind of retribution do you want to see in this case? He said to me, he actually used that word, retribution. And I said, Judge, I don't have anything to do with retribution. That's not my decision. That's up to you, and I'm glad it's not my decision. And then he left, and he just went and touched the defendant on the back as he went out the door. And they didn't send him to prison. They sent him back to jail for a while. And my friend said to me, my brother doesn't agree with me about this. He thinks that they let him off too lightly. But Reverend Mary, I know it was just right. It was just right. He said, you know, forgiveness is so powerful. It is the bridge. He said it's not the thing. It's the bridge that gets us to the thing. The thing is love. The thing is love. That's what eternity is about. And that's what we inhabit all the time. And that's what we have to give and embrace and welcome and look for and see and twinkle as all the time. Love. That's who we are. That's why we're here. That's what we're shining. So let's do it. Let's be it. Let's live it. We are that. We are love. Namaste. Oh, I forgot.
No inner work today?
I do have.
After that, Mary, you got to bring us in, man.
I do. I have the go.
Can't leave me hanging out there in eternity.
I lost myself. Yeah, going deeper would be good if I could find it. What did I do with it? Oh, there it is. Going deeper is. Oh no, I don't have it here either. Isn't that fascinating? Going deeper. Live this moment so that it adds beauty, kindness, and joy. In this way, we influence the manifestations of eternity even here and now. So let's go within. In this inner work, we are grounded in the knowing that no matter who we thought we were, no matter what we've experienced, no matter what we have yet to forgive, love is who we are. Love is our choice, it's our being, it's our nature. We can't get away from it, we can't undo it, we can't damage it, we can't lose it. It is the deepest essence of the light, of the vibration, of the being, of the infinite intelligence that we are. This is the truth. It has always been the truth. It will always be the truth. And so in this moment now, we let it all fall away, all that other stuff that we've believed. All that other stuff we've believed about other people, about ourselves, about our failures, about our egos, about the world. Because there's something deeper than all of that, deeper than all of those appearances, and it's love. Just love. We embrace it, we lift it up into our hearts and minds, and we celebrate it. We rejoice in it. We are so blessed to be brought into this life and expression as love. We take hold of it with enthusiasm, and we throw it back up into the universe with gratitude and joy, letting it be, entering into the delight of it all with gratitude. And so it is, now, and here, and in eternity. And so it is. Yeah. Okay, there we go.